Hi there, and welcome to Season 2 of Cyburst, a podcast about science, popular culture, and entertainment. We're your hosts, Isabel
and Ella. We are two science communicators and sci-fi nerds steering this spaceship, alongside guests, into the multiverse of science fun. Today's episode, AI Panic, Artificial Intelligence, Mainstream Reactions, Where We're At Today, and Where We May Be Going.
Ooh. So this episode is going to be structured a little bit differently because today we have a very special guest, our friend and former cybernetics colleague, Adrian Schmidt. Adrian, you want to say hi?
Yes, hello.
Thanks for coming.
Thank you for having me.
Before we dive into the topic and all the cool things Adrian has done, it's really important that we acknowledge that this episode of Cyburst is being recorded on Ngunnawal and Ngambri lands. Indigenous Australians are the first scientists and artists, and we like to pay our respects to elders past, present, emerging, and future.
Sweet. So with that, let's jump into kind of like a broad introduction of the topic, what we're chatting about today, kind of set the scene a little bit. So AI, we've heard of it being thrown around a lot recently, but it has been around for a pretty long time already. Shout out to John McCarthy, maybe distant relative of mine, from 1956, who coined the term.
That would be funny
Crazy.
if you're related.
I mean, somewhere, right? We got the same last name. AI is artificial intelligence, and I guess like an easy definition of it is that machines, devices, objects are said to be artificially intelligent if they can interpret data or information and potentially learn from this and then use that knowledge to adapt or succeed in completing specific goals.
It doesn't mean they're conscious.
No.
Some people think that.
And it's not the same as automation, but that can be part of this. Within AI, artificial intelligence fields, we have machine learning, neural networks, conversational AI, and more. Currently, we do have a lot of artificial intelligence in our daily lives. It helps bankers make decisions. It exists on all our personal mobile devices. And also, a whole bunch of really cool people are using it to make art. If you want to know more about pure AI, we're going to kind of deviate away from this topic a little bit. If you want to know more about AI, I really suggest there's a 21-part crash course series for free on YouTube, all about it, including some labs where you can do some hands-on learning too.
Oh my God.
Which is crazy.
What?
Awesome.
Yeah.
On that note, thanks, Ella, for that great introduction. Now I'm going to introduce our guest. So Adrian is a physicist, educator, designer, and maker. And I feel like I should also add baker.
Oh, very true. Very true.
Passionate about creating technologies for positive impact. He has a first-class honours degree in science.
Oh my goodness.
And 6 years experience as a science communicator at Questacon. And for those who don't know, that's the National Science and Technology Centre in Australia. And has also previously worked at the ANU School of Cybernetics with us.
Yeah, indeed. Hello.
Adrian specialises in the design and delivery of workshops, artefacts, and experiences that cultivate systems thinking and approaches for making safe, sustainable, and responsible technologies.
So good.
Love. And actually, at the time of this episode coming out, he's probably in the middle of his master's degree in human-computer interaction at Carnegie Mellon University.
Woohoo! My goodness, that's scary to think about.
Well, welcome, Adrian, and thank you so much for coming.
Thank you for having me. I'm so excited to be here and to talk about AI and cool artwork as well.
Hell yeah.
So back in 2022, we had a big launch for the school. And as part of that, we held an exhibition displaying cybernetic creations, old and new. And as part of that, Adrian and our other colleague, Ben Swift, built an interactive AI art installation called Panic, hence the name of today's episode.
Wow, we're so clever.
So I thought it might be a good idea for Adrian to introduce Panic, maybe talk a bit about what it is, how does it work, why it was made.
Yeah, indeed. Well, so PANIC, it's a bit of an acronym that stands for Playground AI Network for Interactive Creativity. We put a lot of thought into that, I tell you what.
It's clever.
Yeah, seriously. It's this interactive artwork that takes a series of AI models that were all available online and essentially allows someone to type something in, and then we generate an image based off of what someone's typed in. That's pretty standard. You might have seen about this on the news or just on social media. They got quite a lot of publicity. The difference that we have is then we tack another AI model on top of that, one that then describes what the image is. And so someone types something, an image is generated, an AI model then describes what's in the image, and then we repeat this cycle of an AI model drawing something, an AI model describing that, an AI model drawing something based off the description, and then another model describing that. So it's a bit like a game of telephone, and this exciting sort of cycle to see what on earth these AI things are going to be drawing at the end of it.
And when does that cycle end?
Well, I guess at the end of it is whenever people are watching it. So it just keeps on going forever. We had one that ran for about, I think it was like 2 or 3 days. Just went straight on.
Oh my God.
Yeah, it went for a while. We had like a few hundred, maybe even 1,000 images in that cycle. And it was quite interesting to see what happened with that. Like we saw sheep popped up quite a lot through that process. So it was sort of, I can't remember what the starting point was, but sheep appeared quickly. I think typically because lots of images had clouds in there and the AI describer was like, well, big white fluffy thing.
I know what that is.
That's a sheep. And then as it turned out, it was really good at drawing sheep. And so we got lots of fields of sheep. Yeah, I know. Why sheep in particular? Not too sure, but I guess there's lots of images on the internet.
What was the weirdest thing that you saw it generate?
Oh, there was some really odd ones. I saw there was like a brown mountain with 7 pink horses on it. That then got seen as, I think, it got seen as a camel, which...
You know what? That is so wild.
Yeah, well, it's particularly wild because whenever we typed camels in,
it couldn't do it.
It couldn't do it. Like it would draw a camel initially, and then the thing that would normally describe what's in the images would never see a camel. It would see a giraffe, it'd see a horse. I think it saw a cow once.
Similar, I
I
guess.
was just waiting for pink horses on a mountain.
Seriously, it was like pink horses on a mountain. I know what that is.
That's so bizarre.
But in the actual context of seeing an actual camel, not a clue.
I noticed that it couldn't do certain Australian animals.
Many Australian animals are missing.
Which is fascinating.
Which ones could it do? Which ones couldn't it do? Do you remember?
I can't remember.
So I think kangaroos it was okay at. That's quite a distinct shape, and there's lots of images on the internet of kangaroos.
I think it might have been echidna or wombat or something like that.
Echidnas and wombats it was terrible at. And it's quite interesting because I think it says something about the models that we used.
Yes.
The first image that was drawn was always pretty good. I think of those particular, like it could draw an echidna on the very first go, or it could draw a wombat on the very first go. But the model that we used to describe those things completely missed those sort of concepts. Like I think a wombat turned into like just a mound of some sort, like a dirt mound, which I guess, you know, if
visually that makes sense.
Yeah, if you're thinking about the sort of patterns that appear in an image of a wombat, like round, brown, near the ground.
Yeah.
Pretty safe to assume that's ground related.
So then it might just go, well, brown mound. So stuff like wombats, stuff like echidnas would often sort of get erased very quickly through this process. You can imagine like playing telephone with someone where you whisper a phrase to each person and someone doesn't know the concept that you're trying to communicate.
So they forget it really quickly because it's not existing as part of what they already understand in our world.
Totally. And so then that thing just disappears and suddenly, that whole idea does not appear again throughout the whole thing. Which I think says something interesting about these AI models too, of if they're missing pieces of information, the rest of the structure around them could be perfect. But even if one is flawed in some way, then that's going to have some carry-on effect throughout the whole model.
Yeah, really interesting how you described it as being erased. That's going to live in my brain forever.
Yeah, it's interesting. Erasure was something that I was looking up with AI models the other day as well, because they're built through data, right? Lots and lots of data is essentially what's needed to make an AI model, and they quote unquote learn from that data by seeing it over and over again. And essentially, in most processes trying to recreate that data in some way. And an interesting problem that's come up with these sort of AI models is that how do you erase data from a model is sort of this mystery idea. Like you can imagine if you had something that was trained off of lots of people's personal data, and then someone says, actually, I don't want you using my personal data to train your model.
How do you take that learning away?
Well, and so that's a really interesting problem that has been maybe kind of sort of solved for some models by some people in Stanford, but on the most front, it's a problem that is not solvable.
Whoa.
And that's it. It's a big problem as well with these things because, like, they then either have to be completely retrained from the beginning, which is a very expensive process.
Yeah, and that isn't exactly like solving it, right? It's kind of like scrapping what you had and going.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's
Going
like
back.
start over
Yeah.
because, you know, one piece of information that was in there is something that you don't want in there. And that's going to be a consistent problem that happens, particularly as data has, you know, data always has some sort of bias in the way it's been collected. Like
Yeah.
it's almost impossible to have to not have that sort of thing. You could think of it as an error, but that's going to cause problems at some point down the line, depending on what you're trying to achieve with an AI model. And so removing things that are causing your errors, causing your biases, can become a very expensive process, and one that I think we'll actually hear quite a bit more about in the future. As we go forward, more of these things are happening, and people are building these bigger and bigger models on top of other models.
Yeah.
Because eventually they're going to have to start over.
I hate that. Oh no.
Unless we solve this problem.
Yeah.
So yeah, I keep an eye out on how to erase things from AI models.
That's huge. That's huge because it kind of is like the building block of it, like in the data set. Like it's not so much the model itself, but what it was made from. Like it's so fundamental.
It's so fundamental. It's that base layer that everything is built up on. And so many of the models that you might have heard about, like ChatGPT and all of those sort of ones, many of those are built up on top of previous models.
Yes.
And so the original ChatGPT, it was based off of something called GPT 3.5, which was an enhanced version of a previous model called GPT-3. So essentially they took something that was pretty good at generating text and they fed it even more information, particularly sort of people typing with like a chat, like a person on the other end. And they went, here's what it looks like when you have a good interaction with someone over a chat. So enhance yourself a little bit more based off of this. And so you can imagine if someone was like, well, there's something in that original GPT-3 model that it shouldn't be in there. If you wanted to get rid of that information from ChatGPT, you would have to start over instead of building off of top of something like GPT-3.
Huge.
Gross.
Crazy.
Very gross. Very gross.
I was looking at this artwork the other day, or I guess another interactive AI art installation. I don't know if you've heard of this one. It's called The Laughing Room.
No.
Oh yes, I remember the video of this.
This is from MIT, and it is an interactive space that's kind of like set up like a sitcom set. So you've got couches, like the table, classic, I guess, kind of scene. And basically people go into it and they try and tell jokes. And if the AI deems what you've said is funny, it will play a laugh track.
That sounds amazing.
And they found with this that, so it was trained off a large data set of audio transcripts, so audio only. It's not like kind of putting it back into, just like text. It's all audio, so it has to like first listen to you right and then understand what you've said and then play a laugh track if it thinks you've said a joke. But these audio transcripts were of stand-up comedians, and apparently the funniest jokes or the most reliable things people said to get the laugh track to play were knock-knock jokes.
I love that.
Which is hilarious because I don't think a lot of stand-up comedians rely on it because it's such like the algorithm knew that if you say knock-knock, who's there? Like,
It's
this
a
is
marker,
a joke.
right?
It's coming.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, that's incredible. So yeah, I guess, so there must have been some knock-knock jokes in some of the stuff they are training it off of too. But I think that does say something that, as you said before, these are not thinking actual processes. You know, they're very much, I like to think of it as pattern recognition as much as anything.
Yes.
And so a knock-knock joke is a very obvious pattern. And so it's very easily recognizable as something that's going to be a joke.
Yeah. I'm just like thinking now, like, how would you go into that installation and be like, actually, we've decided knock-knock jokes, not funny. Don't play the laugh track. I wonder how much it's built off of. Yeah. And if any laughs, like what the proportion of laughter would be if you took knock-knock jokes out of the equation.
Like completely erase them somehow. Per our previous conversation, like retrained the model without knock-knock jokes.
Yes.
What would be an interesting thing? Yeah. I think people's behavior would change. I think this was something we noticed with the panic installation as well, is that the way people interacted with the thing changed over time based off of what they saw the sort of response to be as well. It was very much sort of this, people like almost learnt from how this thing behaved. And I guess it's much the same way too. If you remove knock-knock jokes from the equations and people went, well, okay, let me try a knock-knock joke, because that's probably the first thing anyone thinks of when it comes to a joke, and then didn't get a response. That's they sort of learn about what the underlying things that the model is thinking about as it's going forward. And so with panic, we saw this with what people were typing in particularly. So I think that whole experience with echidnas and wombats and kangaroos came from someone like doing one Australian animal and then going, wait, what? It didn't do that. Okay, let me try another Australian animal.
Yeah.
Oh, it still didn't do that.
Still confused.
Yeah. And so I think that's quite an interesting thing too, is how people change their behavior based off of whether something does something well or does something poorly too.
Did you find people kind of asked or like put in prompts in sets? Like they would pick an idea and then it was all the knock-on ideas from that. It wasn't like new ideas.
Very, very commonly. Yeah, it was quite interesting. I stacked all of the images that were generated into a video, with each one going for like 2 frames of the video, and it was 2 hours long.
Whoa.
And you could see these sort of patterns of like sort of quick prompt of people typing things in and then getting frustrated that it wasn't creating what they wanted to, and then adding more and more details in too. I think that was the other thing that was quite interesting with this process, is that in some situations more detail with the AI model that was doing the drawing was good, and in some situations it was terrible. Like it would just it didn't know necessarily what to focus on in the whole prompt that was provided, which is the words that people typed in to describe the image they wanted. I've experienced this as well, just playing on my own. When I thought I could try and automate making kids' books with some of these things. And
good idea though.
Oh my god.
Yeah, well, I think I've seen some companies that are trying to do it too. And there's something that feels a little bit gross of exposing your children to something like that that's inauthentic and made by a computer. But I did it just to test with the process. And so one of the things that I tried was I asked a friend, what would you like to see? And they wanted a story about their blue heeler dog interacting with a snail. And the monstrosity that came out was incredible. So one, a blue heeler, of course, is blue.
Yes.
That makes sense.
Bluey.
Yeah, bluey, exactly. But when you bring a snail into the equation, for some reason, it couldn't distinguish those two things as different concepts.
Oh, no.
And so, like a hybrid blue snail dog thing was what it would draw whenever there was a description that involved both of the snail and the dog, which is terrifying. But I think it also says something about the level of understanding that these things have and how they separate different concepts. It's very much based off of the semantics of the language, and if it's slightly different than what it expects, it'll try and mush them all together.
Something I noticed, and I didn't test this on very many people, but using what would generally be considered a female name, very quickly it turns into NSFW content.
Not safe for work.
What?
Yeah.
It was, so the model that we were using for the drawing is something called Stable Diffusion. And they have, like, I believe they've released online what their underlying data set was, and it was millions and millions of images scraped from the internet. And you can imagine the sort of content that's on the internet, and women's names that may be associated with those images there too. It ends up getting not safe for work, sometimes rather quickly.
So maybe not ideal for kids' books.
Maybe not ideal for kids' books, or being very careful with the sort of things that you describe in there. I will say, for the installation, we did have the not safe for work filter turned on.
Yes, it was great.
Which is another form of an image detection thing, which it's looking for nudity in particular. And that it blocked most nudity, but there were one or two times when the word, just like a woman, was in the words that it was trying to draw, and you would get nudity appearing.
Did you add that filter?
They do provide it as a built-in thing. There is some safety mechanisms that they're thinking about when they're releasing these things, thankfully.
Well, that's cool.
But you can also turn it off.
True.
Which, I think Stable Diffusion caught a lot of flack when they initially released their model publicly, because they went, look, the nudity filter's turned on for all of the stuff that you're doing with us, but if you want to download the model and turn it off, you're more than welcome to. And they almost encouraged it in kind of a weird way. There's lots of messiness around these things that I think requires people to be very considerate in how they're using these models. I know for our experience with Panic, the question did come up quite a lot of, like, how are we making sure that we are using these models responsibly? And making sure that we are not, we are showcasing them in all of the incredible things that they can do, but also their flaws, which I think we did rather well at the end of the day, because it was this chance to see, very rapidly the sort of imagery that they generated over quite, like, we were sort of generating an image every 10 seconds or so. And
which is quite a lot.
Which is a lot of pictures. It's overwhelming in some ways. But it was great seeing, like, from kids to older people come in and have a look at this and be like, wow, it did a really good drawing that. Oh, it terrible drawing that thing. Oh, why can it not draw hands? And so it was this great thing of, like, seeing that it did help people understand, oh, these things are sort of going off of this idea of patterns and trying to recreate them. And I mean, in the case of something like hands, it's a very complicated pattern. And so it struggles, it can't do it. And this is a great way to show that off.
And on that note, I want to talk about another AI art installation called Unsupervised. I don't know if either of you have heard of it.
No, tell me more.
I've seen little bits, but I'd love to hear more.
So it uses AI to interpret over 200 years of art from public collections at the Museum of Modern Art in New York City. And it's kind of similar to Panic, kind of not. It's a floor-to-ceiling screen installation with, like, surrealist vibes and continuously shifting imagery and sound. So it's, like, shifting from artwork to artwork, and it all blends into each other. So similar to Panic, but it doesn't have that, like, interactive element. You just sort of stand there and watch it. It also incorporates data from the museum's lobby. So, like, changes in light, movement, acoustics, and the weather outside. Cool. Which is sort of similar to another installation we had at the launch, the System of a Sound.
Yes. Yep.
And that affects the continuously shifting imagery and sound. And basically, as the model walks through its idea of artworks, it reimagines the history of modern art and dreams about what might have been and what might be to come.
But just constantly.
Constantly. It's ongoing, so it doesn't stop.
Wow.
So the artist says he made this with the intention of trying to find ways to connect memories with the future and to make the invisible visible. Basically making data visible, and asking the question, can data be shown as a pigment and can we narrate it? Which I think is a really interesting way of visualizing data.
Yeah, and it speaks a lot to wanting data to be pigmented as to, like, why specifically they've gone for 200 years of public art. Like that
Yes.
very much fits the form and the space that they're going for.
Yeah. And so with installations like this one and the Laughing Room, I'm wondering, Adrian, if there were any real world, like other artworks that were your inspiration for making Panic. And do you think this came out in Panic's public presentation?
So I know one that really inspired my colleague Ben was one called Appropriate Response,
Okay.
which was by Mario Klingerman. Who knows if I'm pronouncing that correctly? Which was it was an art piece that it involved split flap displays, which was actually another thing that we used too in our artwork to show off the text.
Yeah.
These are the sort of things that we used in like old train stations where
It's fun.
it flicks over lots and lots of letters.
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
Satisfying sound.
It's incredible. It's so visceral as well. And so
at airports too.
yeah, at airports, absolutely. And so this artwork is one where they're sort of slowly flicking randomly, and the idea is that someone kneels down on like a little pad in front of it, and then it would randomly sort of create an AI phrase while kneeling there, which is, it's a bit of a weird one.
It's kind of spooky.
And so apparently each phrase is unique, and it's generated as soon as someone kneels down. And I think it was this sort of chance to I guess have people connect in some way with the sort of phrases that AI might be generating. This was before this sort of ChatGPT. People are a lot more familiar with AI text generation now than they were at the point that this was released. But that was one that we were particularly inspired by, mostly from the form factor of the thing. As you were saying, in airports, it's so visceral, having the clicky clacky. And
bring it back.
Yeah, seriously, bring it back. They're great.
I'm here for this. Let's start a 3-person rally.
All airports should have split flap displays showing the times on things.
Yeah.
I'm sure they break a lot.
Oh, yeah, true.
Probably not the best places to have them then when you have to be on time, I guess.
Yeah, maybe not. Well, it makes sense then that we swapped to screens. But in the case of something like with Panic, we thought this is a great, really visceral way to grab someone's attention too. And I think that says something about with these artworks, people could see images appearing on screens, and there needs to be a little bit more going on than just that. I think a lot of the people, when they were watching this, were like, wow, it's searching the internet and finding artworks that match what I've typed in. And when I was sort of showing it to people, I'd be like, actually, no, it's making those up from scratch. But that initial reaction of if they were just looking at the imagery was quite different once we had these split flap displays in there clicking away, because it gave people enough time to engage with the artwork.
Yeah.
And then they noticed, oh, wait a minute, that doesn't look like an image from the internet. That looks a bit different. It's a bit weird. This must be generating them from scratch. And so the form factor of the thing, I think, was the real inspiration from this appropriate response artwork.
Mm-hmm.
It's really interesting the personalization, the personal touch it feels,
Yes.
because each one of those artworks yours, and the one you just described, it's like one person kneels or one person types the response. Like even if there are others in the room watching or giving contributions or reading out the phrase, like it's very much like that one person's interaction at a time.
Yeah, I think of it almost as like the instigator, the person that initiates the response. I found with Panic in particular, and I wonder if they had a similar experience with this artwork, groups of people would form and sort of discuss what they were seeing with each other, which I loved that. It was really great.
We like that too.
Yeah.
As science communicators, when you can make those discussions happen, it's very exciting.
Well, I think, and it was wonderful. Like as a science communicator, if you could just like get people talking to each other that didn't know each other before, and they're discussing the topic, they might get some details wrong, but who cares? They're engaging with the thing and talking about it with others, which is wonderful.
Love, and I think it's kind of in that spontaneous exploration and spontaneous knowledge finding path that is into, like, discussion happens. You find yourself in a room, there's a cool artwork in it that you've never thought about engaging with before, but all of a sudden you're kind of thrown into it. And you, in a way, become part of that artwork.
Totally.
And I think that's really special. I want to switch now from talking about like real things that are physical or that we've experienced or that are up as art installations to the art that is popular culture. And thinking about what, if any, pieces of popular culture, be it films or a non-AI maybe generated art piece or anything, phrases, books that Panic might relate to.
Yeah, interesting. In terms of things that Panic might relate to, one of the things I think is quite fun and modern in terms of, although I guess when this comes out, it'll be a few months gone, but the opening to the most recent Marvel TV show,
yes.
Secret Invasion is the name of that one. The credit sequence at the beginning is an AI-generated credit sequence. I don't know too much about how they made it. Like, they just said, we used AI. So I've got a feeling there were many artists' hands in there along the way, but that has been a really interesting thing to see what the response to it was too. Like, it was this sort of weird amorphous blobs morphing between like a clock tower and a poorly drawn person. And I think that is a very interesting thing to see if you want to see what some AI art is producing and what the AI art style almost is.
AI art aesthetic?
Yeah, like an aesthetic to AI art. And then looking up what the responses to it are as well, which is, I think, either people going, it was really ugly, or from artists in particular being like, whoa, I hate this. Do not do this, please. And that conversation as well is a really interesting one too. I don't know if they used, for the basis of the AI model they were using, if it was fully licensed and legal art that they had rights to. Who knows? Which is one of the big criticisms of a lot of these models, is that some of them, like Stable Diffusion, the one we were using, is pulling information from the internet, and so it is taking artworks that may be copywritten or ones that artists may not want used in this way. And so that is a big critique, particularly I think with this Marvel opening sequence of like, where did you get the imagery
Because
from?
Marvel's definitely profiting from this show, right?
Yeah, totally. And so that is a really big question that I think comes out from it. But then the other one is, do we want these sort of things being created by computers? You know, I think there's something fun and novel about it, but there's also something that feels a little bit gross and sad that you're taking the sort of things that you want to be automating, which are, in my opinion, boring workplace emails, and not necessarily drawing or like creating things. You know, replacing those sort of things also feels a bit gross. And so, yeah, the conversation around that particular opening sequence, I think, is really fun and interesting, and perhaps an indicator of what will happen going forward, both in the film and television using AI and artists not being particularly happy about it.
Sounds like it's causing a bit of a panic.
A panic, might you say?
Indeed.
Okay, let's talk a bit about the panic about AI in popular discourse at the moment.
There's a fair bit of it, I think.
Yeah. And so we've mentioned ChatGPT, especially since like that came out. I feel like the panic has significantly increased. Every second post on my socials right now is about AI.
And do you love it?
No, I've got AI fatigue. I feel like the posts are usually, it's funny because they're either like, this great AI tool is going to make your life so much easier, or this AI is going to take your job and potentially kill all of us. And I feel like it's one or the other. Well, yes, exactly. And so we're very worried in Western culture, but in particular, about it replacing us, taking our jobs, making human-created visual art and music obsolete, which is sad. And I think because human ego is very big, we also don't like the idea of that.
Indeed.
And I think some people think it's going to take away our purpose and in the worst case scenario, kill us all.
That is pretty worst case scenario.
Yeah, worse things maybe could happen, but yeah, kill us all is up there.
Yeah, it's up there with the big bad.
Yeah, and this all really, we think, comes back to fictional media.
Yeah, I think fictional media is so on the pulse of what we're thinking, where our fears are, where we might develop into, and we kind of, dream up these fictitious realities, and we display them to each other, and we're like, do you think this is real? Do you think this is going to happen? What about this? Does this seem appropriate to you guys? We're just going to keep putting these ideas out there and playing with them in a way that's artistic, because right now it's not real, and we need to kind of like almost like play test it out. I have like two pieces of media that always come to mind when I think about AI, and they, are interesting. So the first one is HAL 9000.
Indeed, yeah.
From 2001: A Space Odyssey.
Which I haven't seen, sorry.
But I think that's a very, very dominant AI reference in a lot of people's brains in Western culture. So HAL 9000, it's the heuristically programmed algorithmic computer, is kind of like the artificial intelligence onboard computer on a spaceship in 2001: A Space Odyssey, which is a fictitious film. Beautiful, beautiful film. Really well made. But this AI is kind of in charge of maintaining all mechanical and life support systems on board. So these are like pretty important things. And the movie and kind of like this narrative is kind of exploring the ideas of if you give something that's not human responsibility over things that are essential for human life, what could that mean? And without giving too much away, because I still want people to watch it, including Isabel.
I haven't seen it either.
You haven't seen it?
No.
You reacted so positively.
I thought my brother watched it on the plane, and so I saw glimpses of it next to me. And I know it, of course, through Simpsons references.
The best way to know things.
Indeed.
Yeah. So Hal in the movie kind of acts a little suspiciously, like something is a little off as the start of a big plot point. And it's kind of like Hal experiences an error. But an error when you're in space and you need life support systems can be pretty dire. Mm-hmm. And I think a lot of fear comes from that cultural image of the red eye flashing dot. It speaks to you, but it's like soothing but menacing at the same time. So that's the first piece of media that always comes to my mind. And the second piece is WALL-E.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Which is a complete change of pace, but also not. So in WALL-E, we do have the character Autopilot, who is pretty much like a Disney remake of HAL 9000. It's like a little kind of like white bit of technology that has the red central floating eye light that blinks. And this machine kind of like wants to stick to its original task so badly and follow it to the letter, apart from it kind of misinterpreted the task, which was initially do not return to Earth unless it's proven sustainable for life once more. And Auto takes this as prevent any attempt from returning to Earth at all cost. Those are quite different, and that kind of results in a lot of drama. And I was thinking about how closely related they were, and I was so kind of obsessed about the comparison when planning this episode that I forgot that WALL-E himself is a form of AI.
Yeah.
Yeah,
so because when you wrote that example down, that's what I thought you were going to talk about.
No, it took me a while to come around to it, which I think is really interesting in terms of what sticks in my brain and what feeds into the cultural narrative we have going on. So WALL-E, the robot, is quite a positive form of AI. He interprets data, learns new things and fits in new information into his systems, and then kind of makes his worldview, make his mission shift around that new information, which is his mission to clean planet, and how that eventually comes to, involving life forms, not just tidying up rubbish. And I think that is a very, very positive form of AI in media that, especially for me, was so overshadowed at first.
For sure.
I think it's because that movie sends more of an environmental message that's not focused as much on the like AI part of it.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's what I got. I've got a few examples as well that I wanted to talk about.
Of AI in popular culture.
Yeah, I want to hear them.
And are they positive? Crazy.
No. Okay, the first one is the Portal video game. which I don't know if either of you have played.
Yep.
Yes. Okay. And actually, the AI in that has been compared to HAL 9000 from Space Odyssey. So
He's such a cultural character.
yeah, was probably based off that. So the AI GLaDOS, who guides you through the puzzle chambers, her words and actions become more malicious the further you go through the game. No.
She's very sassy too.
Yeah, that's the thing about her though, is like she's sort of passive aggressive, narcissistic, sinister, but also kind of funny.
Do you like her when you play the game? Do you feel endeared to the sassiness?
Kind of.
Yeah, totally. She's like the like the bad person in a film that you really love to watch.
Yeah, it's like when there's a well-developed evil character.
Yeah.
You know.
But still evil.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would say so.
Yeah, I mean the narrative kind of changes between the first game and the second game.
Okay.
But yeah. Also interesting that she's the only character you come into contact with, at least in the first game. So it's an AI the whole time.
Yeah, her and turrets.
Yes.
Yeah, just
If you
want to
count
shoot you.
those. Yeah.
Such positive interactions.
Oh my God, so positive.
She makes you a cake.
She does.
Is it
And sings to a song. It's kind of mean, but
Yeah.
mixed messages?
Seriously. Oh, well, I think that's the theme of this AI in some ways.
yeah, that's the point. The other one is a recent movie which I haven't watched called Megan. I haven't watched it. I watched the trailer and that pretty much just spoiled the entire movie for me. So I didn't end up watching it. But that one follows an AI doll, Model 3 generative android, Megan. We love doing that with AI, don't we?
Yeah, panic's not the only bad acronym that has come up today.
Bad.
Well, forced.
So surprise, surprise, she develops a self-awareness and becomes hostile towards anyone who comes between her and her human companion, who's a young girl who lost her parents and is the niece of Megan's creator. Okay, the other one is, I love this movie, Ex Machina.
Oh, great film.
Oh my gosh, this is one you should watch, Ella.
Is it scary?
Little.
Yes. So this one I touched on in our cyberfeminism episode from a different angle. And so I'll just quickly summarize it again. But basically, a genius asks a young programmer to assess the intelligence level of an AI he's built. Spoilers. This ends with the AI escaping imprisonment, with the inventor getting killed and programmer being left for dead. But it's more complex and nuanced than it being like bad or good, which is why it's an interesting example to bring up.
Yeah, I think it very much leans in the is it alive sort of realm, right? Which is different than I think many of those other examples. Because particularly I find in a lot of media, the evil representation of AI is that it's misunderstood a task.
Yeah.
Which I guess, yeah, it's really the big fear is that there's no nuance in what these AI things are doing, which is probably quite a valid fear in some ways of like what is potential things that could go wrong, misunderstood a task, or I think personally the one that I think is probably a bigger issue is that because they're currently built off of just other data sources.
Yes.
They're a reflection of the sort of our own biases. Yep. And
which includes like fictional media like this.
Exactly.
Right?
Fictional media has a huge impact on that. And so the sort of things that these scary AIs might do in the future is just the sort of stuff that we're doing right now, but more effectively.
It's super interesting that we talk about like the AI interpreted it wrong rather than the narrative being constructed about the person who programmed it not giving it the tools to interpret it correctly. And I think particularly in fiction, we always explore the thing that we loosely have made being negative rather than there being complexities and complexities and nuances within the actions we have done to get it to that stage.
Yeah, I think it's almost the way that we interpret a lot of these stories and probably something that we should try actively not to do in some ways, me saying it's the AI interpreted it wrong. Like, you're totally right to point out, Well, it's the person that built the thing.
But in
Yeah, there's
narratives,
that
it's never
too.
framed that way, right?
No, it never really
No.
is framed that way.
Sometimes, but not as explicitly maybe as it should be.
Yeah, and I think that sort of happens as well with what we do when we're thinking about these AI models. You know, OpenAI is the one that makes ChatGPT, and when ChatGPT does something that we think might be, you know, wrong or horrific, we go, well, ChatGPT did this, and
Yeah.
there's almost this disconnect in a lot of ways of like, well, what did OpenAI do that led to that result?
Yeah.
You know, it's an interesting it's a reframing of the thing that I think is really valuable to try and keep in mind when thinking about stuff like artificial intelligence or just systems that people have built generally.
Absolutely. And I think that is an absolute kind of like mirror held up to ourselves of our own biases, that we are so biased that we don't then want to look
Yeah.
and see how maybe we should be reframing these or connect ourselves to that frame that we're disconnected from. Talking of biases.
Oh, yes.
Oh, wait, I really want to talk about this other film.
Oh, yes.
okay,
Let's
Isabel,
hear one
sneak in
more.
there.
Please, because I just think this is an interesting switch from from what our fears of the past were to what we fear now.
Let's go.
So the movie Her, also about to spoil this movie. I've just spoiled a whole bunch of movies. Sorry, everybody. This one has an interesting ending because it's not as sinister or extremely negative like so many other AI films. Though it is a little bit sad, but the AI has good intentions the whole way through and basically just ends up dumping humans. So our biggest fear has gone from it's going to turn around and kill us to it's going to
unfriend us.
It's going to unfriend.
no.
It's going to break up with us. It's going to dump us. It's going to ditch us and leave, which I think is hilarious.
Yeah, that's great. I don't particularly remember the end of that film, I must
you
admit.
don't?
But I remember being very uncomfortable watching it with my parents.
Yeah, I understand that. I know my parents went to see this one in the movies, and there are certain scenes in that everyone was just silent. The whole thing, like, this is really uncomfortable.
Yeah, well, because the film explores like a person having a relationship with an AI.
Yeah, exactly.
And that gets into
Oh,
weird
I
territory.
see.
I was like, oh.
It is unfriended.
Yes.
I thought I was picking up on subtext. That was the text. I see.
Ugh.
Yeah, it's an interesting one though. That I think that one really is exploring like how people connect with these things too. Which is, I mean, it's something that's happening today. I know there was a Four Corners report about that in part of the Four Corners report was exploring how people fall in love with AI sort of chatbots in some ways, and then companies that then provide physical versions of those chatbots as well. Anyway, I've only read briefly about the story, so I can't speak too much about it. But yeah, there's definitely this. It's not like it's not happening now.
Yeah, there you go.
Finger on the pulse, Adrian.
Sorry, Ella, continue.
Anyway, that's a good segue back to biases.
Yeah.
I'd love to know about if there were biases you uncovered whilst making Panic or whilst it was on display, and potentially also about, you've said before, and this was really exciting to me, about interesting failure points. Yeah, I'd love to know more about that.
Yeah, so I mean, I think we've touched on some of the biases before, but there's kind of two ways to think of biases in a system like this. We could think of it as the level of the individual models that we're using themselves, and then we could think of it as how the whole sort of conglomerate of models behaves. And so that's that collection of models, you know, ending up on sheep all of the time is a bias of those things working together. But on the individual level, there were certainly some biases that popped up too. Stuff like women's names or just the word women coming up with not safe for work imagery. Things like the thing that describes images, that AI model that we used, loved seeing scissors, which is, I mean, that is a bias at the end of the day.
True.
But it saw it in things like hair. Like it sort of the points of hair, it went, well, those are scissors. Which must mean that in terms of the way that it's, you know, seeing, quote unquote, these imagery, it's looking for patterns of like pointy things and going, well, if two pointy things are next to each other, there must be lots of training data on scissors in there, and it goes, well, two pointy things next to each other, that's scissors. So those are some interesting biases that came up. On the broader end of things, that collection of models. So on top of sheep, we also saw pink umbrellas come up quite a lot, which is a weird one.
Was that after sheep? Like, did you say you did something with like a new data set?
Yeah, so pink umbrellas were popping up a little bit. Sort of they would be pre and in between sheep. But that was an interesting thing that happened, is that the thing that we were using that was doing the processing of Stable Diffusion upgraded to a newer version of Stable Diffusion. And so all of a sudden, we were getting much less sheep and even more of these pink umbrellas, or pink fire hydrants as well were a big thing that were popping up. I can't tell you why. I don't know why. But I think pink was a thing that popped up a lot because we had this extra model in there that I don't think I've mentioned yet, which it's just trying to make the imagery a little bit more interesting that was coming out for the descriptions. So you can imagine something like dog would generate an image of something that looked a lot like a photo of a dog.
Mm-hmm.
But you can get more interesting stuff than that. You could add an artwork, like an artist in there, and, dog by Leonardo da Vinci, or dog, like, Unreal Engine render, which would make it look like a computer game or something like that. So there's lots of these extra words that you can add in there. And so we used something called Prompt Parrot, which throws in a bunch of extra words. And so that one in particular had all sorts of weird biases in it too, because it was trained off of like 50,000 posts that people made, which is not that many on the grand scheme of things. And so we were restricted to the styles of these 50,000 images. And so we got lots of art by Greg Rakowski, I believe is the pronunciation, who...
Don't know who that is.
If I remember correctly, makes Magic the Gathering artwork.
Oh, okay.
And so that was a style that the people that, went, well, here's the prompts that we like. They must really like the style of Magic the Gathering. And so the images were often in the style of Magic the Gathering too. So yeah, certainly lots of biases, which can really be attributed to the people that were collecting these data sets in a lot of ways.
So I guess just like those prompts were a reflection of people who created the prompts and then put that into the art style, and that's very reflective in what we saw of the images in Panic. Yeah, we're also very made of the cultural myths that surround our fears of not just AI, but technology in general. But I think it's really important to acknowledge that these biases come from myths and fiction, not reality. And particularly, I guess, going back to something we touched on earlier with framing the AI as being the baddie rather than, let's be real, like the team usually of people who have helped create it at every single step of the way. We kind of fall back into the sole creator, lone scientist archetype because we want like one big bad in fiction to point towards and be like, this is something we're scared of, or this is where we're concentrating all our negative energy. And I think in the same way with like AI, we're like, oh, this one machine is bad.
Yep.
Yeah, instead of focusing on, I guess, like the back and forth between creators and creations and thought process that are there to, try and make things less biased and better in general.
Yeah, there's lots of brains involved, not just one person. There's back and forth between the creations and its creator, or the creation, the audience. There's back and forth between the creators if there's multiple, so like you and Ben, and there's back and forth between the audience of the creation and the creators. So like there's back and forth between Ella and I and Adrian. So we're wondering if you can tell us more about the back and forth in Panic and the feedback loops around that.
Yeah, the feedback loops in Panic. That's been an interesting one. It's so we were making it for the School of Cybernetics exhibition, and a big thing in cybernetics is this concept of feedback loops. And so inherently Panic has got feedback loops within it. And that's why we're seeing stuff like the sheep popping up all the time. That is something like a reinforcing feedback loop where this, as soon as a slight appearance of a concept of that is close to sheep appears, So clouds or even green fields or something like that happens, that nudges us closer towards generating pictures of sheep. It might not happen the first time, but as soon as a field is there, then it's like, oh, we're heading towards sheep, and so we get closer and closer and closer, and eventually we fall into this feedback loop of sheep. And so feedback loops are something that appear so much in that. And I think one of the interesting things too, though, as you were saying, that these feedback loops extend further than just the artwork in that.
Yeah.
And so that's that thing where people were responding to what they were seeing too. They saw, and a kid did not be drawn very well. And so they had a response to that too. And so that was an interesting feedback loop that happened as well, of like, how do people respond to it and then continue to respond going forward? And I don't know how people were talking about it to others, but I'm hoping in some ways that it caused its own sort of knock-on effects of people discussing what they saw.
I reckon it would have.
Yeah.
I reckon.
In terms of just like saying what they saw an AI image generator could do. That's in many ways, I think that's what I wanted the artwork to achieve.
Yeah.
It was get people discussing what these things are doing, some stuff that they saw it doing well, some stuff that they saw it not doing well, and hopefully be able to talk about that with others.
Wow, that was so succinct.
Yeah.
And like the clarity I feel. That. I just want to ask more and more questions, but I think it's question time for our audience rather than to you. Adrian, thank you so much for answering all of our questions. For our audience, I think I would really love to kind of like lead us towards some final thoughts about how do modern installations like Panic contribute to this AI narrative that we're in. And any AI installations, art or otherwise, that you may have seen. Yeah, because I'm not sure how many of you were at Panic, but I wonder how many of you have already interacted with an AI art exhibition and either known it or not known it, is interesting to me.
Are you feeling panicked about AI? I would like to know if people are feeling panicked about AI.
I really hope after this, no. And we understand there's more nuance in it than before.
I hope the panic is placed in the right direction and it's tempered.
So we're doing the recommendations at the end of each episode for this season. And since you all hear recommendations from us every time.
For over a year now.
Yeah, we thought it would be nice that our guest recommends a few pieces of media. So Adrian, could you recommend 3 pieces of media for our listeners?
Yeah, sure. So on the AI front, I would recommend watching the first episode of the most recent season of Black Mirror.
Oh, okay.
It's slightly less depressing than lots of Black Mirror gets.
I love that. I love that so much.
Because sometimes they're just like painful to watch.
Yeah, absolutely.
But it's an interesting take on AI, and it's also related to some of the strikes that are happening right now in Hollywood in a kind of a fun way. So I'd highly recommend watching that. I would also recommend, I've recently just gotten into a show called Actually. I don't know if either of you heard of this. It's by Dropout, which is what...
Yes, I have seen parts of this.
Yeah, so
Still
that's...
not ringing a bell.
College Humor has turned into sort of an online streaming service called Dropout, and they have this show called Actually, which is essentially, they get a bunch of nerds together with various pop culture questions, or pop culture statements, I should say, where one minute detail is wrong in the statement. And so, and it's like a game show of trying, you go, actually, this detail in what you've just said is wrong. And so it's great sort of nerdy pop culture.
I think the format is so fun.
It's great. It's so fun. So I highly recommend that.
Okay.
And then on a weird third out there one.
Yes, excellent.
Has anyone recommended a cookbook before?
No.
Yeah.
Did you know this cookbook recommendation?
There you go. I have been reading through Sweet Enough, which is Alison Roman's new cookbook. And the recipes are like relatively simple and mostly pretty tasty, but more than anything, she's got like these sassy openers to each recipe that I just love so much. And so I think we all need some sassiness in our life when it comes particularly to cooking and all of the
you know, that there's certain like sects of cooking things where people are really sort of posh and over it. And then I think this is a nice bringing back down to earth of it's food and it's fun.
Let's start the sassy food revolution.
Yeah, you bet. You
Yeah.
bet.
So cool. So many good recommendations. And also this is super fun for Isabel and I because now we get to have more recommendations, not just from each other, so we can steal your recommendations.
Yeah.
Maybe have a joint feast where we all bake something from that cookbook.
Sounds amazing.
But we all have
my
to be
God.
sassy at the same time.
Yeah, you
Well,
bet.
yeah.
It'll happen just from reading it.
So I guess on that note, everyone, stay nerdy. Thanks
Stay
for listening
nerdy.
to SciVerse, and we'll see you next time.
See you next time.
See you.
Thank you to ANU CPAS for their support and access to their podcast studio.